We good to go, Maggie? Thank you. 6 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order, the first working meeting of this term of council. I'm not going to say a whole lot because we said most of what we wanted to say last night, but for Crystal and Kevin, welcome. Hopefully you're ready to work. And certainly I think you're each seated beside somebody who takes the job seriously and I know is ready to help you guys out as you go along. Start a little bit tonight and getting prepared for the meeting already, but it'll go on for tonight and hopefully for the next 4 years, and hopefully by the end of the 4 years maybe you guys will be teaching them something and me something as well. So we have 4 timed items tonight. Planning, orientation and training at 6 o'clock, zone change at 6:30, and delegation at 6:45. First item of business before adoption of the agenda is nomination of a deputy mayor. I do have a motion in front of me. Is there anyone else from anyone else before I read this one and put it on the floor? Not seeing one. I have then moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Finch, that Councillor Katie Grigg be appointed Deputy Mayor for the Township of Zorra for the 2022 to 2026 term of council, and that staff be directed to draft the Deputy Mayor County Council alternate bylaw for the December 7th, 2022 council meeting. Councillor Mitchell, as the mover, do you wish to speak to that?
Normally when I speak for something I'm very passionate about, I have a long list of items to make sure that the rest of council sees the light and agrees with me. But this time I only have one reason, and that's Katie's the right person for the job.
Councillor Finch is the seconder. Do you want to speak to it?
I am very excited for Katie to take this on. I have got to watch her a little bit over the last few years, and I think she's more than capable to take this on.
Anyone else wish to speak to this motion? Katie. Councillor Grigg.
Of course I'm going to speak to the opportunity to speak to this, absolutely. So I'm going to be mindful of not using the word strong. When I think about the mayor that we have, I want to use the word strong, but I think that's the wrong word right now. We have incredible leadership in our mayor, Marcus Ryan. He provides well-run, efficient, productive meetings, a positive environment that allows for good, sound decision-making, and advocacy on behalf of residents. With added dedication to skills development, I can provide continuity to this leadership in the event of the absence of the mayor. But I can also assist in expanding the leadership initiatives at the discretion of the mayor on behalf of the residents of Zorra. There's no better leadership to learn from and work closely with, and I graciously accept the nomination for the position, and I ask for the support from my fellow councillors in providing me this opportunity to serve as deputy mayor.
Anyone else before I read it again and call the question? I'm going to read it again and call the question. Moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Finch, that Councillor Katie Grigg be appointed Deputy Mayor for the Township of Zorra for the 2022 to 2026 term of council, and that staff be directed to draft the Deputy Mayor County Council alternate bylaw for the December 7th, 2022 council meeting. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And I think we will take 5-minute break, not from the video, you can leave the video on, but just a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back, okay? And my mic wasn't on. Spencer, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Great. All right. I'm going to call the meeting back to order at 6:05. All right, so the next, sorry, not Spencer yet. First, we should adopt an agenda. Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that the agenda be adopted as printed and circulated. Are there any issues with that agenda? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. Minutes. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that the minutes from the November 2nd, 2022 council meeting be adopted as printed and circulated. Are there any issues with those minutes? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And no public comment period comments submitted. So we will go to Spencer's planning delegation, planning orientation. And Spencer, how do you want to do this? Do you want us to interrupt you with questions as you go, or do you want us to make notes of them and ask you at the end? What would you like?
Yeah, I'm not too fussy, Mr. Mayor. A combination of both is fine with me. Just being cognizant of time, I think there is a timed item for 6:30, so I just keep that in mind as we go along. I think there's 20 or so slides to get through.
Okay. So I'll suggest then if you guys have a question, I mean, if it's relatively trivial, sort of want to clarify something, I would just say interrupt right away and we'll ask it and get it out of the way. But if it's maybe a little bit more involved, maybe we wait to the end and see if Spencer covers the whole thing. Okay? Sound reasonable, Spencer?
Yes, it does.
All right, I'll turn it over to you.
Can everybody see the screen fine?
We can.
Perfect. Thank you. And just before I get started, I would just congratulate yourself, Mr. Bear, and the fellow councillors around the table there. It's a big role that you all play, and I'm very fortunate to be part of the great team there at Zorra. So just welcome aboard to everybody there. Tonight's session on council orientation, I much prefer the term orientation rather than training. I think over the next few years, we'll certainly get into some more training, as it were, but tonight's session is very much orientation. So planning in Oxford County, just a bit of an overview for you. The county, who's my employer, is granted authority for planning matters by the Planning Act. And planning is administered at the county level through the Community Planning Office. So downtown Woodstock, the Oxford County Administration Building is primarily where myself and all of the other planning team work out of. And then we spend office hours in the various municipal offices as well. The county is the approval authority for OP policies, subdivisions, consents, condominiums, and there's input obviously from yourselves around the table as these matters are brought forward. And implementation of the official plan policy through the zoning bylaw and site plan approval guidelines are the direct responsibility of Township Council. So when it comes to any matters pertaining to zoning or site plan, it's direct involvement from the township. Planning advisory and related admin services provided at the township under service contract. These are the details which are not so much of interest to me necessarily, or the day-to-day role that the planner has within the Zorra office, but it's important to note nonetheless. And generally, what's important to take from this is that I, as the planner for the Township of Zorra, do provide the day-to-day planning services. So when I'm there every Wednesday and Thursday, it's not uncommon to have a number of residents come in and just ask a quick question or arrange a meeting with me to ask any type of question about their property or property they're considering a project on or otherwise. So as noted, I typically work out of the Zorra office every Wednesday and Thursday, but I'm certainly able to, if there are meetings that council has requested that I meet with residents or otherwise, then certainly there's flexibility in that schedule as well. And reports, this is an important part here, that reports that come before you, you'll see one later tonight. They come with a recommendation from the planning department and from myself as the planner. And then obviously you around the table have the ultimate power to make those decisions. So I make the recommendations and you collectively make the decisions. As far as the composition of our planning team, Gord Huff is our director of planning, and we do have 7 development planners. Myself being the planner assigned to both Southwest Oxford and Township of Zorra. And we also have a planning policy team. So Paul Michaels is the manager of the policy planning team. And there are 2 policy planners under Paul's kind of policy umbrella, and then 1 technical planner. So if there's specific data related inquiries, or if we're doing growth forecasting or population projections or otherwise, even water capacity type inquiries, those tend to go through the technical planner, who's Holly McClure of our office. As far as the planning hierarchy, in the province of Ontario, the Planning Act is the top document, if you will. From there, the 2020 PPS is the most current provincial policy statement in place, and then the County of Oxford official plan, and then most directly impacting Zorra Council and Zorra residents often will be the Township zoning bylaw. You'll see more often than not inquiries come in about zoning matters at the township level. But it's very important that over the course of the next few years that everybody gets quite involved in generally having an understanding of all of these documents and not just the township zoning document. Development applications, some examples there: draft plan, a subdivision or a condominium, zone changes, minor variance, consent, site plan approvals, and part lot controls are all things that you'll be involved with to some extent or another. As far as the role of the PPS is a higher level policy document, and it provides direction on matters of provincial interest related to land use planning. The most current version is fairly contemporary. It just came into effect May 1st, 2020. And this next point is very important. Municipal approval decisions shall be consistent with policy statements issued under the Planning Act. So really important that you know when you do see a report from the planning department, whether it's recommending something be approved or not approved, as the case may be. You'll often see if there's a recommendation to not approve something, it will say that it is not consistent with these permits. Alternatively, if there is support to recommend approval, you will see that everything is consistent with the PPS and is also in line with the county's official plan and the township zoning bylaw. The PPS provides policy basis for the OP, the policies, and the making decisions on other planning matters. And maybe just I'll stop there, Mr. Mayor, for a moment to see if anybody has any questions thus far.
Doesn't look like it, Spencer.
Okay, awesome. So as far as the county's official plan, the official plan did come into effect approved by the province in '96. But I just direct your attention to a couple of bullet points down from that. Chapter 3, which relates to agricultural policies, was very recently updated. So there was certainly a lot of involvement from members of council, local councils throughout the county to pull those policies together and to, in part, comment on changes that councillors and bringing the voice of residents forward to the county level should be reflected in some of the policy tweaks which have been made within Chapter 3. Chapter 6 is also going to be important at the township level, just given the fact that in Zorra we do deal a lot with policies for some of the rural clusters which we have in the township, and the villages and service villages. As far as these schedules which you see on the screen before you, these are the land use schedules contained in the official plan, so certainly take a look at those, get a sense as to what kind of detail is included in there. And I would encourage all councillors, whether you're a brand new councillor or a returning councillor, please always feel free to reach out if you have questions for me or for any type of planning matter as it relates to some of the documents or even mapping issues related to schedules that you might see. Always reach out to me, because sometimes these schedules can be a little bit confusing, or you might say, is the line hard and fast, or is there room for interpretation? And there's often instances where it would warrant an additional conversation. The township zoning bylaw is, as I mentioned, really what provides the day-to-day administration of land use in the township. And the bylaw specifies permitted uses, so whether it's commercial, residential, institutional, or otherwise. But it also gets into more refined detail. So it would specify various setbacks that are required within any given zone, building size, massing, scale, the level at which each is permitted, depending on the zone classification it's in. As far as the bylaw itself, it is administered and interpreted by the township's chief building official. I would just note that we do work very closely together, the township chief building official, and quite frankly, all of the staff work well together in this regard. But often, if there are questions about the zoning bylaw, if they're not directed at me, they'd be directed to the chief building official. Building permit applications must comply with the new zoning bylaw. Must comply with the zoning bylaw. So that's again a reference to what I mentioned earlier, where if you see a report from staff, it will make direct reference to if something complies or does not comply. Continue just some key maps. So in the township zoning bylaw, you'll see a series of key maps, and the index map is kind of the most important one to help get your bearings if you're looking at a specific property. So development planning, there are a number, I think I've covered some of this, so I'll just motor through it a little bit, but some of the application types are just listed there for you, and you'll see many of these over the next number of years come before you for consideration, recommendation, or approval, as the case may be. Other applications processed by community planning but require approval by township council, yourselves, are zone change and minor variance. So on any given agenda, you may see applications for zone change or minor variance. Minor variance applications are processed internally at the township level, but community planning does serve to assist in that process. And as you are aware, townships committees of adjustment are formed by its council, essentially, that sits as the committee of adjustment. When I mentioned that we have a technical planner in-house at the county level, a lot of the work that Holly McClure, our technical planner, would work on are some of the things listed here. Census data, stat profiles, population projections, and we are available to assist in that capacity. So if any counselor or resident has an inquiry about some of these types of things, certainly feel free to reach out to our department to assist with that. Aggregate resources. This is an important slide to have here in Zorra, given that Zorra is such a prominent producer of aggregate in Ontario. I think Mr. Mayor might know better than I, but I think Zorra is the 6th biggest producer in Ontario. But I could be wrong in that, but it's certainly a significant producer of aggregate. Just some stats there for you, and as time goes on, we do expect to have some updated stats beyond the 2017 period. The aggregate process is a little bit different from other planning processes. As such, I don't anticipate you'll see a number of them coming before you on a regular basis, but it is important that you're aware of them as a land user. These schedules in the OP will also show you the areas that are comprised of those resources, so those are available for your review. Section 3.4 of the official plan, conformity with the official plan. So with all planning documents, whether it's the PPS or the township zoning bylaw or the OP, there needs to be some level of conformity or consistency in that the language changes depending which document you're referring to. But essentially, as you're reading through reports from our department, you'll know that it's always emphasized whether or not something has achieved that overall conformity with the official plan. There are also cumulative impacts to the extraction operations. So this is, again, going back to aggregate. But you can look at these things, and as I said, they shouldn't come up as often as other application types, but when they do, certainly reach out, and we'll be happy to have conversations about them. The after use of aggregates is also important. So when the licenses get surrendered on pits, the after use is something that needs to be considered. whether it's returned to an agricultural condition or not. It's something that needs to be looked at very carefully and ultimately does get approved provincially. That rehab plan is called rehabilitation plan. So there is multi-level involvement when it comes to these aggregate resources, from township council level all the way to various provincial agencies. Ontario Land Tribunal. They seem to change their name every few years, a few times in the last few years anyway. You may know them as LPAT, the Planning Appeals Tribunal, Local Planning Appeal Tribunal, but currently going by Ontario Land Tribunal. And this is where, if we have a matter before council, the decision is made, the public and others do have the right to appeal those decisions. So in Zorra at least, I do notice that the mayor does a very good job of reminding everybody that that period is in place after a decision is made. So it's just a reminder to the public, as well as to staff and otherwise, that there's an appeal period attached to any type of planning decision. It's a 20-day appeal period. So if something gets approved tonight at council, for example, really doesn't come into full force and effect until after that period is up. The land tribunal itself, I will just mention, there are a lot of changes proposed, and perhaps I could have prefaced at the beginning of the presentation, but there are a lot of potential changes coming to the way planning is conducted in Ontario. Some of them may come to fruition, others may not. We're kind of waiting to see how that may shake out, but I'm quite certain that we'll have future discussions about some of those changes going forward. But one of the such changes proposed has to do with the land tribunal, and it's been proposed currently that the province is looking to remove the ability for third parties to appeal planning decisions. So what that means generally is just, if somebody doesn't appeal something because they disagree with it or they have very valid land use planning argument to be made, they would no longer have that right to appeal it to the tribunal. So we'll chat further, I'm sure, as we go along in the term of council about that and other changes. So we've saved some time here. We've got a few minutes for questions. Should anybody have some questions for me?
Questions for Spencer? Paul?
Spencer, from time to time on our agenda, we get where residents are applying. I think it's called the County Land Use Committee, and they're making an application to that, and we have the opportunity to comment whether we approve, support their application or don't support it or have no comment. Can you expand on the role of that committee and how we interact with them?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Mitchell's question about the county's Land Division Committee. So they're referred to as LDC for short. And the Land Division Committee, just as their name suggests, they make all decisions relating to the division of land. So if somebody has a lot which reasonably could be severed in half, let's say, whether they're in one of the villages or if they're in a more rural setting and they're proposing a farm split, some of those things are viable according to the county's official plan policies, and provided they meet the various requirements of the PPS and of the official plan and the local township zoning bylaw. The Land Division Committee, they do meet once a month at the county building, downtown Woodstock, to decide on those matters, to hear those matters. And it really comes, those items, as Councillor Mitchell suggested, do come before local council just to say, somebody within Zorra's jurisdiction has applied under the Land Division Committee to do something, whether it's divide their farm or sever a house off from an existing farm. And Township Council does have the opportunity to provide input or just recommend saying there's no issue locally with what's being proposed, or if they require more information on a particular item before LDC, there's certainly the opportunity to be more involved with that.
Any other questions for Spencer? I'm not seeing any, Spencer. I think so either you overwhelmed them or anticipated all their questions. But I think the main thing there, I think, is that they have your contact info on that slide there. I think they know where you sit when you're here. And I would just encourage you guys, as Spencer said, to just fire him an email. You see a planning application, you have a question on it, just fire him an email and say, what does this mean? Can you explain this to me? And certainly he's always like very quick to respond and willing to spend time with you on it, especially if it happens to be a Wednesday or Thursday when he's here anyway. Anything else you want to add, Spencer?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, just one final thing. I've just mentioned that I'm always happy to get the comments and inquiries and questions and people dropping in to meet with me, because it's much better both from a resident standpoint and from our standpoint in our role as planning staff to have a chance to chat with people about things. It's always better than just finding out that there's a surprise application before you.
I'm going to add one thing to your presentation, Spencer, which is a pet peeve of mine, and that is that you'll frequently hear from residents that the planner didn't recommend that I get my whatever zone change that I wanted or whatever, right? And I always point out to them that it's not Spencer. Spencer's providing us professional advice, and what it is Spencer saying the provincial policy statement, the official plan that the county passed, and the zoning bylaw that the township passed. When I analyze those, it tells me that you should not approve this thing. Right? So he's analyzing the policies that we gave him and telling us, based on the policies that you told us to use, you should not approve this. It's not his personal opinion, it's his professional opinion based on policies that 3 levels of government have passed. So I always point that out to residents because sometimes they think that there's an argument, say, between the planner and council over whether this should be approved or not. And it's not an argument at all. What it is professional advice based on policy documents that we've given to our planning staff, and they're reporting back to us on that. So it's just, I think it's important that residents understand that. I think it's also important for the planners to be given that respect, that it's not just their personal opinion that you shouldn't be allowed to have this zone change that you want. It's as a result of the zoning bylaw that this council has, either explicitly by passing it or implicitly by not changing it, said that's what we want you to evaluate all these things for. So I think that's just a key thing. Spencer went through that in one of the early slides. There's a provincial policy statement, obviously passed by the provincial government, official plan passed by Oxford County Council, and zoning bylaw passed by this council. And all he's doing is saying, you gave me these policies to analyze these things by, and I did it, and therefore this recommendation. Okay, anything else, Spencer?
No, I think, yeah, the biggest message, as always, Mr. Mayor, is feel free to reach out with, even if you think it might be a bit of a wild question, it's better to make that contact than to not.
Thanks, Spencer.
Thank you.
Which we gotta wait like 2 minutes for now. Now we need not Welcome to the Jungle, we need like Jeopardy music. That's a good idea. So, we're gonna start zone change application at 6:30. So we do have to wait until actual 6:30, right? Because it's a public meeting, so somebody might be waiting to come to it, so we can't start in advance. There is in your agenda, I don't know if you guys saw it or under item 7, there's a little tab there for zoning agenda. So what's gonna happen is council meeting is gonna be adjourned by a motion, and we're gonna then sit in a public meeting, same 5 of us in the same spots and everything. Spencer, I'll ask Spencer to do the report. I'll ask you guys for questions on his report. So we're not speaking to whether it should or shouldn't be approved at that point, just questions on the report. Then I'll ask the applicant if they wish to speak to their application, which is up to them whether they want to speak to the application or not. Then there will be the public question period if there's anybody either online or in person who wishes to speak to it. And then we will end the public meeting and come back as council, because council will decide on the zone change, and we can't decide in a public meeting, we have to decide in a council meeting. So procedurally, that's all that happens. You don't have to keep track of it. I will keep track of it. If I don't keep track of it, she will keep track of it. But just so you know, that's what's all happening, and there's reasons behind it all. It's not all just sort of arbitrary, whatever, right? There's reasons behind this in the Planning Act, and definitely if you want to understand more about why all that happens, you can ask Spencer, and he'll give you the detailed reasons under the Planning Act why it has to go that way. But that's what's going to happen in a minute. Okay? I've got 6:30. So I have moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that the council meeting be adjourned at 6:30 p.m. for the purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Spencer, you're back.
Yes, I am.
I'll turn it over to you to present your report to council, and then I'll ask them for questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Perhaps for this application too, I'll just, for the benefit of council, just emphasize that this application is an application for a zone change. You can see in the report, it's property owned by Lorena Chalkley and affects lands in Lakeside. And the property itself has previously gone through an application for consent. So Councillor Mitchell had asked a question about land division committees. So I just mentioned that land division committee at the county level has already seen an application from the applicant of this zone change, and that was to facilitate the creation of this lot. So this residential lot that Ms. Chalkley is proposing to create and rezone, as outlined in the report and shown on the screen, is just under an acre in size. This is considered a residential infill lot. And the lot does require site-specific rural residential zoning. And the reason for that is it's deficient in the required width. So they've got, I think, just about 18 meters, as outlined in the report there, of frontage. And the requirement is 35 meters in these rural residential zones. So what we do in these cases is apply a site-specific zoning. So the zoning that will go on this, depending on the decision that's made, would be site-specific to this property only. And then as councillors go through the zoning bylaw and read, you would see that that site-specific zoning only applies to this particular property. As far as the application before you, it was circulated for comment. And the primary comment I would draw your attention to is that from the Source Water Protection Group at Oxford County. And that has to do with the location of the well and its proximity to the lot which has been created. The challenge here is that they are within what's called a WAPA A, a wellhead protection area. A is the innermost circle, if you will, from that wellhead. So it's the least time travel if something disastrous were to occur. If there was a leak or a spill of some sort, it means that any liquids or fluids or otherwise could reasonably reach that well much quicker than they would if they were further removed from the wellhead. So that is outlined in the report for you, and as a direct result of that, there is a need to draft a provision in the bylaw which stipulates that for any new dwelling, which is erected on this lot, there would be a maximum front yard depth assigned to it, and that is given the septic system which would be required. The septic system cannot be located within a WAPA A. So that's a direct requirement under source water protection policies in the Clean Water Act. So that's a requirement, and as such, the zoning bylaw will reflect that. Aside from that, the application did receive some other comments, but there was nothing major of concern. We are recommending approval in principle of the application tonight. The applicant is waiting to receive the final survey of the property. Once that's in hand, I will be bringing this back forward with the final bylaw and the mapping associated with it for final approval, depending on tonight's outcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Spencer. Are there any questions from council on the report? Paul.
4 questions, Spencer. First of all, number 1, the wellhead protection area, is that for the municipal well that services the village of Lakeside?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes it is.
Okay. Second one, would this be a situation where an alternative septic system such as a Waterloo biofilter, which requires much smaller septic bed, be recommended or even required?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to that question, the main requirement of the source water protection policies is just to ensure that the septic system is kept out of that WAPA A. It does not get into specifics about the type of system, whether it needs to be a certain efficiency or otherwise, or a more expensive system. We wouldn't get into that categorization, but in some of the other areas further removed from the wellhead, WAPA B, WAPA C, sometimes they do have provisions in place stipulating those things, but there is nothing specific other than a prohibition policy in place for this WAPA-A. So I anticipate that the applicant or the future purchaser of this lot would consider any number of systems, but really that will come down to a discussion between them and the township's building official.
Okay, so it's not a requirement. And third question, would the construction of a garden suite or second permanent residence be prohibited on this property due to the septic provisions?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there's nothing to indicate that a garden suite or in the future what we'll call an additional residential unit or otherwise would be prohibited on this property. Again, the only real prohibitive component here is that of the septic and the associated pipes and connection to the septic. So as far as locating potentially a second dwelling or a tiny home or something like that, depending how the policy comes to fruition here in the future, those I anticipate would be options for this particular property.
And my last question, do the septic provisions impact the construction of an accessory structure that doesn't require a septic hookup?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, an accessory structure could reasonably be located generally anywhere on this property. The caveat to that being, if somebody purchases this lot and wants to put a garage, say, in the front yard, they would require minor variance for that. Accessory structures are not currently permitted in front yards in the township zoning bylaw. But there is a property in close proximity to this, I think maybe two properties to the immediate east, where the applicant has done that exact thing. So the house is further back on the property and the accessory structure is in the front. So something like a scenario like that could be achieved, provided the accessory structure does not require that connection to septic, because those pipes and system itself would need to be outside of that 60-meter distance.
Thanks, Spencer.
Any other questions for Spencer on the report? Does the applicant wish to speak to their application?
Not really. I think most things have been covered.
And is there anybody from the public, Alicia, online? No? Nobody? All right. Then, moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that pursuant to the Planning Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 6:38 p.m. and the regular meeting of council be called back to order. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And I have here, moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch. You guys are on a roll over there. That the Council of the Township of Zorra approve in principle the zone change application ZN 5-22-12 submitted by Lorena Chalkley, whereby the lands described as lots 24 and 25, concession 13, East Nizuri, Township of Zorra, be rezoned from General Agricultural Zone A2 to Special Rural Residential Zone RR 26. Paul is the mover. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I support this application because it's a classic case of infill. You can see in the map that's provided that there's residential housing on both sides of this small lot. It's only 60 feet wide, so as far as an agricultural unit, most farm machinery can't even get down it, let alone turn around. And it has been approved by Land Division, so I see no reason to not approve this application.
Councillor Finch is the seconder. Do you want to speak to it? Anybody else? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So, as I think you know, there's a waiting period for appeal, but you've talked to staff and they'll ensure that you're not proceeding before that waiting period is up, and other than that, you're good to go. Thank you. Thanks, Spencer.
Thank you.
And where are we at? Not quite at 6:45 yet. So, yeah. Steve, you ready to go? 9.4, Public Works Department A, Report 2022-191 from the Director of Public Works regarding a construction update of the Zorra Maintenance Facility. What would you like to update, to highlight for council?
Nothing to highlight, a bit of an update on the solar. Ryan Parton from Crescent Ridge give us a bit of an update earlier this week. This week they're working on the final wiring pulling being installed from the roof to the connections inside the building. They're hoping to have that completed this week. Communication wires this week being completed. They have a little bit of duct work to move inside the building to make room for the inverters. The week of the 21st, they're going to perform all the AC wire pulls. Earth is doing that. Crescent Ridge to install the house meter and disconnect tray, and then Earth to advise day of shutdown so they can go further with further connections. And then on the week of the 28th, they're supposed to be installing the SCADA system, which monitors all the input and outputs. And then Earth is hoping to complete their work and receive connection authorization. They're hoping to have this ready for testing mid-December, and be producing hydro by the end of December. So everything's moving along really good in that. So that's their update on that. That's all I have.
Questions from council on the report? Paul?
Steve, the attachment from the contractor for drilling the geothermal wells can list some of the reasons, and also in the chart that some of the extra expenses they've run into, but it doesn't really explain how they came up with the credit of a little under $30,000. So do you have any more information of how those numbers were determined?
I don't. Unfortunately, I requested that again. When I first requested it, I got the rundown of what I provided to council, and that's really not a breakdown of how they come up with it. It was more or less just a breakdown of what their overages costs are. So I'm still waiting on that information. It doesn't quite make sense to me with the overall price of all the holes and the wells, but I'm hoping to get that information. I'll have some more on that by next council.
Thanks, Steve. It's a mystery.
At this time, yeah, unfortunately.
Any other questions on the report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell. That item, Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, the report 2022-191 from the Director of Public Works be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We'll try and get another one in. Diane, 9.5 Finance Department. A, report 2022-178 from the Director of Finance regarding year 2022 from Finance regarding 2022 budget to actual update. Is there anything you'd like to highlight for council in that?
No, that we're just finishing the third quarter, and that there's still a number of large invoices that we haven't received, and so that there still have to be a lot of expenses still to come in for the last quarter, along with some more additional revenues. So once they'll come all in, we're still looking good. I'm happy where we are. Mm-hmm.
Any questions for Diane on that report? Paul?
Yeah, there were some things that jumped out at me, Diane, and maybe it's because the red ink caught my attention, but general government rental properties, we were budgeting net revenue, and we're at expense right now, so what's behind that?
And that's correct. So we had received the funds, but they haven't been allocated to the revenue account, so that's will be corrected.
Okay. And environmental?
Yes, so we are looking for additional revenue to come in December from Oxford County, and that's the standard $2.50 per household that
Okay.
we're allocated.
Okay, so we're just waiting for the check to come.
That's right.
And camp program, we were projecting 10,400, and it's 64,000.
So just in this area is the revenue has been received in deposit, but we just have to make the revenue adjustment. And I'm working with the Recreation Department in early 2023 to look at potential streamlining of this process, so it'll make it a little bit easier for staff.
Okay. And under Public Works, we were 1.2 million. and as opposed to 4.5 million, and yet a note that has to do with the ZMF build. So can you explain what's going on there as far as, because we've had a delay in the completion, I'm sure there's some financial impacts.
Yes, so we have not finished up with the full construction loan and actually obtained the debenture loan yet. So what we're doing is we ask for a construction loan on an ongoing basis. But because the interest rates have been climbing, I've been using our cash flow instead because we are not making as much on our money. So I figured we'll save money instead of borrowing. And then by the end of this year, though, I'll be asking for a construction loan so that we can make sure it's in the 2022 records. Okay. And then also, as a side note, we did, when the project was first started, we had obtained a potential debenture loan at 2.15%. Just to let council know, the last time I had requested an update on the debenture schedule, we're looking at 4.87% now. So that will be part of the 2023 budget. So you'll see an increase in the debenture payments. Okay?
Okay, so because the building has taken twice as long to build as we thought, this is having lots of impacts on how we're going to finance it.
That's correct.
Unfortunately. And my last question is, I always want to know when the OCF grant comes in. Have they sent that check yet?
Yes, we just got it in November.
Okay, so we got the whole 229 now?
Yes.
Good.
So we're just looking for now, we're just waiting for 2023's projected amounts for each of the municipalities. We haven't received that yet. So that's what we're waiting for now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else have questions on that report? Katie?
Not a question.
Mayor Grigg, sorry.
Is this going to be easier than the last name change? Not so much a question, just a comment. I thank you and rely heavily on your background and comments ahead of this report, because going through the report, it's full of things that don't add up, red flags, some of them that you've identified as red flags, some of them that just feel like red flags are illogical. So I'm going to, I appreciate your professional opinion on where we're standing and what's concerning or not concerning for you. And then also just that fourth quarter budget to actual is what I'm hoping to see. It's great to have this ahead of that, but I think there's a lot in here that we can't do a heck of a lot with, because there's just, there's not enough of the picture available for us to really see where we're at. So thank you for this, but then also thank you for your summary comments about your interpretation of this.
Anyone else? Questions on this report? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch, that report 2022-178 from the Director of Finance be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody want to speak to that? All's in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And we're at 6:45. And Nancy, can you hear us?
I absolutely can. Can you hear me?
Yep. All right. So as I say to all delegations, assume that this council has done their homework and read the ample material that you provided. Hopefully they read it, because it's kind of about them in one way or another. I'll turn it over to you for your delegation, and just remind you to, if you can, if you want to, leave time for questions at the end. I think they're going to find it engaging, and I'm hoping that they're going to have some questions for you. I'll turn it over to you.
All right, let me just share my screen here. So can you see my PowerPoint there?
We can.
Perfect. So congratulations, first of all, to you, your worship, Deputy Mayor and Council, and thank you for being willing to serve the residents of Zorra Township. I'm excited tonight to be able to share some of my learnings with you, with my master's, of which you've seen is a research focus on housing affordability in non-metro areas, a project for which I'm absolutely grateful that Zorra was a part of. And I'm hoping today to leave you with some ideas to encourage further action. So what does it take? Don't you all want to know that magic bullet? And for those of you that are involved with the housing system, you're more than well aware of the complexity of it all. I'm not a magician, and we're likely to need more than one bullet. But what I do have is a review of the existing literature, insights learned from 3 case studies, and wisdom garnered from an incredible group of cross-sectional industry leaders, all helping to identify local and enabling conditions. The housing crisis is not new, and one that you're all familiar with. The lack of housing affordability has caused significant strain on many facets of non-metropolitan area communities. Housing issues involve all levels of government. However, burdens are felt most strongly at a local level, and much of the responsibility has been left to you at the municipal front. I understand that you have all received a copy of my executive summary and fulsome thesis, which includes lots of context, details, and data. So as I skim through tonight, I'd encourage you to look at the findings from a perspective on identifying where you can have influence and act. We need to think differently, challenge the norms, set the future, be courageous, and ask why not. So I'm just going to give you a really quick refresher to re-inspire you on why you should care. And I encourage you to identify people or groups that you know in your communities or that you need to engage with to build a robust team of action. Health and well-being. It's been agreed upon globally that access to stable housing is a human right. Housing disadvantage can actually be used as a predictor of poor health outcomes and social struggles. The environment. Environmental consequences and carbon costs from our expansive scale of large lot, single-family residential trends are many, and include the reduction of green space and loss of our rich agricultural lands, all posing a challenge to our goal of becoming a lower carbon economy. The economy. As we know, housing need is no longer targeted solely at the impoverished, but it is still heavily referenced as a top game changer. The lack of housing significantly impedes meeting workforce needs, limiting our community's potential. And renters are stuck. With a lack of availability and vacancy decontrol, they can't move to a closer or more suitable space as current market rates await them. The lack of availability, especially in our small communities, has also created a highly competitive market, both financially and in broadening the landlord's choice of tenant. As a sector, the housing industry is a substantial contributor to the economy, both from a GDP scale and a personal investment. So the challenges of affordability struggle to find priority in a market-driven economy. Again, I hope you've identified somebody or a group in each one of those areas. Housing dynamics. It has been a long history of policy decisions and social behaviors in a market-driven economy that have failed housing affordability. What can we do? Supply. Is it the right supply? Because more of the same faster, I don't believe is the solution, and nor do I believe that we can just build our way out of this affordability crisis, doing exactly what we've always done. That's what's led us here. We need to offer choice to serve all markets. And are we ensuring we preserve and renew the affordable stock that we've got? Municipalities, you have influence here through policy, facilitation, or leading as a proponent. On the demand side, we have financialized and commodified housing, which has contributed to the transformation of the Canadian housing system, whereby housing is bought, sold, and priced as an asset for speculation, a commodity through which to accumulate wealth and leverage debt, instead of being rented or sold as a social good. We need to make a concerted effort to ensure there is sustained affordability to address impacts of speculation. And municipalities, you can have influence here too, through nonprofit private partnerships, proactive preservation, and development and demolition permitting. Policy. This is a decades-old problem across our country, and particularly in Ontario, where the ball was dropped with dissolution between 1994 and 2017. We have been left with a poorly functioning, fragmented amalgam of policy and funding initiatives and a system that was not designed. But municipalities, we need to advocate for needed systematic change. We need to have a rural voice heard during policy development, as is the case right now. All levels of government play a role in housing. They've recognized the crisis, but actions have thus far failed to produce the needed results. But locally, we have influence. Housing is inherently a community issue. It requires land, which is locally defined. It's up to us. We can't wait. We have the power. We just need the will. So again, I'm hoping you've identified somebody out of each of those categories that you can draw on to create a team of action. So really quickly, to go through the case studies that you've already read about. Perth Meadows. This development started with a cross-sectional group of collaborative, persistent, and creative citizens determined to allow their seniors to age without having to leave their community. The dreamers and the schemers. They worked with the municipality to secure 11.5 acres of greenfield property for a phased seniors continuum of care. They now have 18 life lease townhouses, 36 apartment units, and 85 privately run assisted living units, with the final phase of hoping to attract a long-term care component. What did they learn? The importance of vision, and extensive outreach and communication when a new model is being proposed. They learned the value of influence of community leaders, just like yourselves. They learned the importance of a robust financial plan and the need for long-term operational capacity. It took starters and finishers. Maple Tree Community Housing. This is in Goderich. This grassroots volunteer initiative repurposed a derelict abandoned seniors home to provide and sustain 12 affordable rental units. This group consisted of technical expertise as well as faith-based organizations, and they rehumanized housing through sheer determination. What did they learn? That it takes a lot of work, that you need to have capacity for the long haul, and that if you talk to the neighbors and ensure the property is well maintained, you just might become just part of the neighborhood. People power, passion, perseverance, and intentionality. My very favorite, Maple Leaf redevelopment right there in Zorra Township. When I tell people that a community the size of Thamesford was going through the closure of the community's largest employer, which held title to 121 acres in the center of town, led you as a municipality to facilitate a complete mixed-use redevelopment to provide over 800 housing units, completely transforming available housing stock to your community, they're amazed. You demonstrated that if you're brave, progressive, and collaborative, you can turn lemons into lemonade. We need to be flexible with plans, ideas, and schedules, be creative in problem solving, and that we have to build a team and trust them to do their work. And that you can do all that while protecting public interest. Congratulations to you as a council and staff. You have built momentum worth leveraging. The road to success on any housing solution is not usually smooth or short, but in the end, certainly worthy of the effort. So all of this data taught me, the first thing that jumped out is the importance of understanding our local needs, community dynamics, and local nuance when you're evaluating housing options. And instead of focusing on the challenge of rural, flip it, leverage your strengths. Yes, we might be conservative, skeptical, and even sometimes combative with density and diversity options, but we've just not been exposed to enough of it. We keep thinking housing is a senior level government problem, that they'll swoop down with a solution to save the day, but really we're hardly on the radar. We have strong social connections, deep community allegiance. We can be nimble, responsive, innovative, and action-oriented. You have demonstrated that. We have the resources and are resourceful. So what's needed? First, we must recognize that it will take local action to make community impact. We cannot wait. Land or space. This seems to be the primary enabling condition. Without it, nothing happens. And it may seem obvious, but it is so critical that it needs to be stated. Where is it? Who has it? And you as a municipality, you often hold the key or can facilitate its identification or use. Greenfield, underutilized, or buildings to augment or repurpose, or identify those low-rent buildings that we're at risk of losing. Enabling policy. The two most frequently highlighted categories include those related to land use and funding. And as you just heard, land use operates under a provincial umbrella, but much is still within your municipal purview. It's hard to argue against the flaws of a single-family dwelling on a large lot in the current housing crisis. The logic that a piece of land could be zoned for a single-family home or a 4 or more story building, the latter would provide more housing, would be cheaper per unit, and would be more environmentally sustainable. Funding. We can't wait for the right funding opportunity to come down from above. Funding programs are not consistent. They create winners and losers, and we cannot wait to be a loser with the hope of being a winner. We know there isn't enough to go around. Of course, we have to apply. You never get anything you don't ask for, but we sure have to have a broad financial plan and be willing to commit ourselves. General responsiveness and flexibility with a solutions-oriented mindset are also significant. Roles. It's an attitude. We all play a part, and we really do need to embrace the power that we do have. Find that story and personal connection that motivates and connects you to housing need. We all have one. Perhaps you as a council, it's your responsibility to community. Perhaps a direct link to your business or income. Perhaps you have overhoused aging parents, or maybe we're the ones aging and hope to heavens that there's PSWs can find a place to live in our community when the time comes that we need them. Or maybe you have kids that still live at home because there's nowhere for them to go. Or maybe you have been faced with the struggles of workforce shortages. Those people in need, those people are people we know, people we see all the time, and they may even be us. So my research highlighted 4 consequential roles, and collaboration among them facilitates the best approach. So, where do you fit? The first one, political will. This is the public sector component. This is one of the many hats you as an elected official or municipal staff wear. Engineering, planning, building, economic development, social services, or service managers, or perhaps approval agencies. You come with great influence, vision, and responsibility. You're entrusted to serve all of your electorate, regardless of age or socioeconomic status. You hold a position of authority to advocate for the needs of your community. Councils can only go as far as they want to, so don't be your own barrier. Think of affordable housing as infrastructure. Imagine the response if our hospitals, parks, libraries, schools, or water systems were only available to the exclusive. Set the strategic direction, expectations, and enabling policy. Advocate, facilitate, and educate. And this, Zorra, is where I would suggest you as a council have demonstrated great leadership and have the opportunity to do so again. Your strategic plan and community safety well-being plans have demonstrated your commitment to housing. I encourage you to continue the momentum you've created, to continue to look at innovative solutions to fill the housing void. So I challenge you. 1, is there another parcel of underutilized land you could put needed housing on, or a building to repurpose or augment? And this time, include a long-term affordability component with expanded partnerships, perhaps with a not-for-profit component. 2, what are you as a municipality building? Could housing be incorporated? 3, look at your policy, as you've just been given an overview, to ensure density is enabled within your town boundaries. Smaller, taller, inside, beside. Don't wait to be directed by the province, exceed it. And include affordability conversations in any development process. Facilitate and convene those conversations. Local champions. Housing solutions need a leader that show the vision and persistence required for meaningful progress. And Dawn, I congratulate you on playing that role with the Maple League Free Development. This role, they're a focal point of steady coordination, communication, and facilitation. They convene and activate the activators. Housing expertise, private and nonprofit. Private sector developers, builders, renovators, those with the expertise, they have incredible skill and knowledge, and solutions can't be done without them. They have great depth of experience and knowledge, ability to leverage, and many of them don't deserve the broad label often put on them as greedy developers. They're running businesses just like many of us. Those that see the value in open, proactive dialogue with their municipality, neighbors, or partners, or engaged to solve community needs, they are invaluable, and you again have demonstrated that at the Maple Leaf Redevelopment. There are lots of opportunities for them to engage if you get them to the table. Again, they're an essential partner. The not-for-profit component, one that I think is often overlooked. They're mission-driven to ensure long-term affordability. Lots of opportunities for different kinds of models and partnerships. If you can't find yourself in any one of those, you might be hard-pressed to escape the one as community citizens. Neighbors, voters, volunteers, business owners, or employees, we hold much influence on the process of addressing housing affordability. We need to reflect. Do we behave as backyard champions or community citizens? And I get it, as Canadians, most of our wealth is tied up in our homes, but does that mean others don't deserve one? At a minimum, we can be welcoming of new neighbors, be informed and supportive of different housing options. We can't wave the housing crisis flag and then blockade solutions at every turn. Plus, consider if we want to address rising taxes or protect our ag land, then we're going to need to densify. And as part of this group, perhaps you have ideas to share or space at your place to create an additional unit or income stream. You can always offer your time, talent, or just a positive attitude, or be part of the volunteer pool to leverage a solution. No one gets off easy. We all have a role to play. And I know it can get overwhelming, and sometimes we don't know what to do, so we do nothing. But we have to figure out how to operate within the parameters of past decisions and set a new future path. And we can act locally. So to quote an inspiring colleague and housing advocate of mine, no one can do everything, but we can all do something. Draw on and activate that list of amazing people and groups you've written down, because municipalities are where the direct impact of needed housing is felt, where collaboration and innovation reside, where kindness and compassion germinate, and where homes get built. Envision what is possible. Don't let perfect be the enemy of better, just get started. So what does it take to bring housing affordability to our communities? It takes you. It takes all of us with a willingness to act, and of course, some land and space. So I thank you for your time and interest, and I do hope I've left you with some ideas to inspire continued action or perhaps a new perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Are there any comments or questions from council on that presentation? Crystal.
I would just like to say that is amazing, and your passion behind this is wonderful. And I question, do you go to other municipalities and give this same presentation?
As through you, your worship, we have done this at several municipalities. Certainly I offered to do it to those that participated in the research. Every municipality is struggling with the same issue you are. It's a difficult situation across the board. So I have been quite willing to share my knowledge and my expertise, and I work right now with the private sector development side. I work with some not-for-profit side and municipal side. So I am kind of spread across the board.
Anyone else? You have a follow-up? No? Paul?
Yes, I echo Crystal's comments. It was fascinating reading your thesis and comparing what we did here with the other two projects, how it was driven, what the goals were, and the obstacles that everybody faced along the way. Page 7, you write, housing is currently under a rapidly evolving policy context, so the findings of this study may be altered with new influences. So I'd be interested to know, with your background, in your work background you just mentioned, and also the study, the two things that really got worse have been inflation and higher interest costs. And inflation, we know, are just supply outstripping, or demand outstripping supply and causing prices to rise. And the current wave of inflation is blamed on COVID, broken supply chains, labor shortage, invasion of Ukraine. But there's also two federal policies that are driving inflation. One is the energy policy, which makes the production and distribution of everything more expensive, and also a 27% increase in federal government spending in the last 3 years, which puts more money into a system creates more demand when there's not the supply. And on the other hand, the Bank of Canada, in trying to fight inflation, is raising interest rates, and that has the most immediate impact on mortgage rates and how many people can afford those mortgages, and the demand on not so much demand on housing, but the number of people that can afford to buy housing. So then the builders are caught where they have inflation with their materials and labor to build the houses, and they're now having higher financing costs, developers and builders, with a potentially lower sale price for the housing once they get it built. So we as a municipal government are also caught in the middle, because the provincial government is bringing in legislation that supposedly for more housing, but it's taking away a lot of our control over housing and potentially our revenue through development fees. And we have a federal government that is going the other way, that is making incentives not to build housing. So I apologize for the long, but I wanted to give some context to what my question was there. Those two impacts, what can we as a municipal government do to counter those huge impacts that are coming down from above?
Boy, that we could talk all day about all the different points that you brought up there. Thank you. And I'd be glad to offline if you want to talk further. We certainly don't get to all your points. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. Right now, our senior levels of government have focused on the supply issue. I don't believe we can build our way out of the affordability crisis. Because right now we're in a market system and the system is working exactly as it is intended. We've created a capitalist market-driven economy. So not very many people are going to build something at below market rates. We don't go to work to lose money. You can't expect a builder to do the same. So that's why we right now have to look at things completely different. No more same old, same old. We can't keep building big single family dwellings. We need to look at partnerships. We need to look at entirely different models. And there's several of them going on right now, especially in Quebec. They're doing a really interesting model where the not-for-profits are pooling all of their assets to leverage so that they can absolutely quadruple the number of community housing units that they have. We just need to look at things very differently because you're right. Supply is not going to help solve the affordability crisis. Inflation, the Bill 23 is the one you're speaking of, I assume, which is where I would encourage you to have your voice heard. Again, we could talk for an hour about the different things that are included in there, and we're still waiting for more details to come, but it does not address affordability at all. And it does take revenue away from the municipalities. You can't include affordable housing in DCs. They're taking away, you're going to need more capacity. Again, we could get into all sorts of nuances on that bill, but inflation is not helping those that need housing, and the government spending on supply, it's got to be the right supply. It's got to have a sustained long-term affordability component, which in my opinion has to have either a municipal, public sector, or not-for-profit component.
Thank you for that. That was well worth all I said to get your response.
I can't believe you got through it all. Thank you.
My other question is much shorter. 100, 120 years ago, we saw employers building housing for their employees. And there's houses in Stratford that were built by the railways. There's houses in St. Mary's built by St. Mary's Cement. And this week, I read in the paper that Hayter Turkey Farms are looking to build housing for their employees. Do you think that is a possibility that we're going to see a return to something from the early 19th century where employers, the only way they can attract and keep employees is to provide housing for them?
Thanks for that question, because you're right, it's not new. Look at the tobacco farms, look at all of our farming operations. This has been going on for a very long time. It has been a bit of a taboo because it gets into some human rights issues that if your housing is tied to your place of employment, what if your place of employment is really lousy and you want to leave, but you can't because it's tied to your housing? But I believe there's a way. Again, there should be nothing off the table. Let's ask why not. If there's a collaborative model, whether it's hospitals getting together or a whole bunch of farmers getting together or a municipality facilitating something, that you can collaborate and have it operated at arm's length and everybody contributes to providing workforce housing, I certainly think there's an opportunity there. I really do, because this is a workforce issue, an economic development issue, as much as it is a human rights and social issue.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Nancy. I'm going to read the motion to receive and file your delegation. I think you can probably expect some follow-up from some of the members of council. I will say I've read Nancy's thesis at least twice, front to back, and this is, I think, at least not counting the times I've presented it with you, I think this is the second time that I've seen the presentation and then presented with Nancy twice, once to South Huron Council and then to the Rural Talks to Rural conference a few weeks ago. And every single time, even though Zorra is in it and a project that I was involved in is in it, every single time I learned something new from it. So yeah, hopefully we can take some lessons from this and apply it over the next 4 years of this term of council.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that item 8B, housing affordability thesis, be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And back to you, Diane. 9.5, Finance Department B, Report 2022-192 from the Director of Finance regarding year 2022 for excluded expenses in the 2022 budget, Ontario Regulation 28409. Is there anything you want to highlight for council in there?
This is the final report for 2022 during the budget process. What it does is outlines if our revenue is covering both our operating expenses and our amortization of our current assets. And looking at, so what we'll have in the top under your revenue sources is just all the revenue that we are expected in 2022 to receive, okay? And our expenses are just the operating expenses. There's no capital in here because at the time, these capital assets are not our assets. So we're not amortizing them at this time. That will be in 2023. And then, so what we do is we take your revenue, reduce the expenses from there, and you have your surplus. In both of these, your transfers to reserves and from reserves are also not included in this. So we're showing a surplus of $5,121,978 projected for 2022. And then we'll less the amortization expense that we did not put in our budget. And so we're showing that even when we take out our amortization expense, we're still looking at a surplus, which is a good news story. Okay?
Questions for Diane on that? Paul?
Just one. There's a big number, almost 3.3 million on other income. Does that include sale of township property?
Yes, it does.
So that number is unusually large.
That's
We
correct.
can't expect that next year.
That's right. And we transfer that to reserves, right, to be utilized for future projects. So that transfer to reserves not in here, okay? So it's kind of overinflated a little bit when you look at it like that, but next year it will correct itself, okay?
Anyone else on this report? Okay, I'm only reading this one once. And moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, whereas council acknowledges that expenses related to amortization expenses are excluded in the 2022 budget, and further, that expenses related to landfill closure and post-closure are excluded from the 2022 budget as this function is not within the township's sphere of jurisdiction. Now therefore be it resolved that the council of the Township of Zorra accept the excluded expenses of the 2022 budget as per Ontario Regulation 28409, and that the council of the Township of Zorra receive report 2022-192 as information. Does anybody wish to speak to that? In favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thanks, Diane. And Corporate Services Department, 9.6A, Report 2022-183 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk regarding 2022-2026 council appointments to boards and committees. And Alicia, is there anything that you want to highlight in that report?
I just want to say, so for our new counselors, every term, Zorra counselors are appointed to various boards and committees that I've listed out in this report. Right now, staff are looking for direction as to which boards and committees the counselors want to sit on. And the appointment bylaw for this would be coming back at the following council meeting. And with that, I'll just leave it open to council.
So thank you, Alicia. So I should have pointed out too that I do not have a motion for this, so you guys have to take some initiative here and fill it out however you want. Maybe Paul has already. And something else that I forgot already. Can't remember. Any questions for Alicia on that report?
I'll pose it as a question, but it's just a statement more for the new counselors. So this is our current existing boards and committees, and we don't typically, we're moving away from the use of committees in township to work with task forces, and with task forces, we're not appointing counselors membership to those task forces as they arise. But is there the potential for there to come a new project, like, for example, I'm on the Zorra Multi-Use Courts Committee that's focusing on a project in Thamesford. If something were to come up like that in this term for another area in the municipality, and there's a formation of a committee, would we just appoint at that time?
Yes, that's correct. So we would bring the terms of reference for any new projects and new committees, and at that point, we would amend the appointment bylaw and appoint a counselor to sit on that committee.
Any other questions for Alicia on this? Anybody got a motion for me?
Well, maybe a quick discussion on, it was, what the motion's got right here is that Ingersoll Cemetery Board would be Kevin, North Embro Cemetery Board would be Crystal, and the rest were up in the air. And Katie and I had both put in for Upper Thames, but we had talked a few days ago, and I would like to serve on the Upper Thames again. I was a little frustrated a few months ago with some of the things going on, but I've got over that, and I think, especially with the changes in legislation, there is going to be a huge turnover on the board, and I will probably be one of the few returning members. So I think I have not only an interest but a responsibility to serve in that role again, and I hope to play a bigger role on the board. So Katie agreed that I would take the Upper Thames, and that she would be one of the museum board members if the rest of council is. So that would leave a decision on who would be the second museum board member. And Katie also pointed out that she's also, what was the other, the court security committee that is that someone we need to appoint at this point as well?
So I received correspondence from the county today that that committee no longer exists as of this year, so there will be no appointment to that.
So if I could just briefly, I checked the mandate, and I'm not sure which aspect of the mandate has been fulfilled. So this is something that we sort of have been talking about in the final hours leading up to this meeting, but it's not something that I remember receiving correspondence on, because the mandate was either to annually approve the funding model, which I would anticipate we're still being charged whatever that variance is between what's provided from the province and what we so unless there's been some update that way, but I think the appointment for that committee, even if it were to be continuing, was done separate from these appointments at some point in the future. And that was the discussion that I had with Paul, is there is the potential for that other role and another appointment to be made or shuffled amongst this council at some point in the future, for there to be that added responsibility. And then the other side of it would be the potential for an additional project that does warrant a committee, which as we're moving away from them, a committee is still what is required legislatively for anything that is making a recommendation to council that requires a funding commitment from the municipality. So those things I like keeping in the back of my mind, just as we're sort of sorting through this and trying to be fair in the distribution, also recognizing where there could be an ask of other councillors at various points in the future in this term. So sorry, Paul, that the piece about the Court Security Advisory Committee, I think we're still sorting through exactly what the position is on that, but just for reference, it meets once a year. If it were to be a misunderstanding at this point, and it is proceeding, it's one meeting a year.
So I'm going to suggest that neither of those was questions, and we should really have a motion on the floor now before we speak to it again anymore. We're supposed to be setting a good example. Well, somebody should fill it in with something.
Further suggest that between Kevin and Crystal, which one wants it more? Best 2 out of 3 falls, or?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I think obviously either of us could take on that role, but just proximity-wise to the ward that I'm in as well, and just being something that honestly I think connects to a lot of people within the township. I'd like to get a little bit more knowledgeable on what's going on there, so I'm willing to take that on as well.
Okay, I'll fill in the vote.
Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Finch. that council approve the following 2022 to 2026 board committee appointments. Ingersoll Rural Cemetery Board, Councillor Kevin Stewart. North Embro Cemetery Board, Councillor Crystal Finch. Beachville and District Museum Board, Councillor Katie Grigg and Councillor Kevin Stewart. Upper Thames River Conservation Authority Board, Councillor Paul Mitchell, and that staff be directed to prepare a board committee appointments bylaw for the December 7th, 2022 council meeting. Paul is the mover. Do you wish to speak to that?
No, I think we all put in the list, and thanks to Alicia for sorting that out. We identified what we're interested in, and I think we're all going to make a difference on these committees.
Councillor Finch, do you have the seconder? Do you wish to speak to it? Anybody else? I will just say, first of all, it was a lot easier for me this time than with all the committees to have to go through and juggle it all. I think Karen and I spent a good hour 4 years ago trying to balance out workload and interest and effectiveness and everything of all the 5 members of council and all the different committees that we had, and it's greatly simplified now. The second thing I would say is I want to thank Paul for offering to continue on Upper Thames. Yeah, there's been a lot of change in Conservation Authority legislation and regulation, and it's not over. I've talked with at least 2 other mayors about who they're going to be appointing to that board, and for all of us, it's been a consideration about, that there needs to be some level of priority placed on continuity of the board members. Otherwise, having a board that's 80% new with massive legislative and regulation changes is just not going to be effective. And I think even with the carryover, it's going to be challenging. So I just wanted to thank you for being willing to do that. It's responsible governance, which sometimes it feels lately there's not quite enough of. So anybody else wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And Corporate Service Department 9.6B, Report 2022-186 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk regarding additional 22 to 2026 appointments. Alicia, is there anything you want to highlight in that one?
No, there's nothing I'd like to highlight. I'll just leave it open to questions.
Questions from council on the report? Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that council enact bylaw 73-22 to appoint the Property Standards Committee, bylaw 74-22 to appoint the Committee of Adjustment, and bylaw 75-22 to appoint fence viewers. Anybody wish to speak to that? Katie.
This is how we did things last term, and obviously historically, and it's worked really well, so I don't see any reason to deviate from it, so I'm happy to support this.
Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.6C, Report 2022-180 -184 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk regarding 2023 council meeting schedule. And Alicia, is there anything you want to highlight in that report?
Yeah, so just a couple things. So the February 15th, March 1st, and March 22nd were noted as budget meetings in the schedule I have up on the screen. But after discussions with finance, we would like that to be removed. Any additional budget meetings would be scheduled in the new year as needed. So that was the one. The second thing, and I have to thank Councillor Mitchell for pointing this out, there was a typo here. The last meeting in December, it says December 22nd, 2023. That is a Friday at 6 o'clock, which I don't think anyone here would want to attend. It would make me very unpopular with staff and council. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Before I ask for questions, I'll just point out this is another one where I don't have a motion here yet, so whatever you guys are cooking up, just ask your questions in such a way that you can fully bake that and get it to me. And I think, Paul, you had a question.
Yeah, I just figured, I only found that mistake because I had such trust in staff that I actually went and entered this schedule into my day planner, and I found out that that was a Friday, and I figured Alicia's not going to be here. It was just a trick she was playing on us. Yeah, exactly.
Anyone else? Katie?
I have a comment. It was great to get this report and see that the suggestion for the September daytime meeting have a start time of 9:30. I arrived, as a choice, I arrived 30 minutes late for the September meeting this year so that I could attend my son's first day of school. So it's just great, and this is not the only example in this agenda where staff are really, listening to what's happening here and making recommendations, back to us that support sort of what our priorities are. I have 2 drafted motions, and I'm being mindful of how to not discuss them until they've been read. But the difference between the 2 is just whether or not procedural question. Do I have to pick one and have him read it to then and then ask those questions? Yeah. Okay. So that's just a comment of gratitude for that being a recommendation into the time frame for that September meeting. Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Questions on the report? Paul?
Just to clarify, the February 15th, we're just taking the budget part out. There's still a meeting that day.
That's correct.
Okay. A less stressful meeting.
Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart. That report, he talked before about his signature, right? That report 2022. Do you remember Margaret? I told him, remember what Margaret used to do, Ron? That report 2022-184 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk be received and filed, and that Council deviate from the Procedural By-law Section 4.1 and adopt the 2023 Council meeting schedule as amended and remove budget from the February 15th, 2023, March 1, 2023, and March 22, 2023 meetings, and change the December 2022-2023 Council meeting to December 20th, 2023. Councillor, Deputy Mayor Grigg, do you wish to speak to it as the mover?
Thank you. So this proposed schedule, I think, works well for myself sitting in this chair and thinking about the meeting schedule for the year and the business that we have to take care of, obviously with the addition of any emergency meetings that are called. The only question that I had for the rest of council is that, of course, for the first day of school, having that availability to come in and start our meeting half an hour late is a wonderful asset, as 4 out of 5 counselors and many of our staff members that first day of school is important. I have the ability to be here and ready to work for a 9 a.m. start. My only concern was that maybe we could take this opportunity to pause before passing this to ensure that the 9 a.m. start on all of our daytime meetings is still achievable for members of council for arrival.
Anyone else? Councillor Finch?
9 a.m. is achievable. However, I would love 9:30 if that was an option. I don't know. Can I say that? Is that?
You can say whatever you want. The question is, do you have a seconder? Do you want to make an amendment to the motion that's on the floor? So procedurally, what's going on is this is on the floor now because I read it with a mover and a seconder. So this is in your hands right now as to what you want to do with it. So as it is, it doesn't say to change it to 9:30. If you in fact want to change it to 9:30, the procedurally, technically perfect thing, notwithstanding friendly amendments, would be to make a motion to amend it to change the start time of the day meetings to 9:30, and you would need a seconder to do that.
Can I ask? Is that okay
Absolutely.
with
You
everybody?
just say, can I have a seconder?
Can I have a seconder?
I will second that. And I also have some verbiage prepared by staff to ensure that the amendment is as what would be needed. So I'll bring that over to
To
Crystal.
the mover. Thank you. All right, so now what I have is an amendment, which I will read and then explain where we're at, just so everybody's clear where we're at procedurally. Moved by Finch, seconded by Grigg, and that staff be directed to amend the procedural bylaw to change the meeting time start day from 9 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. for day meetings. So before I ask anybody if they want to speak to it, I just want to make sure you understand, we're only speaking to this amendment now and whether the original motion be amended in this way. So we're not speaking to the original one that I read with all the 20s in it. We're just speaking to the amendment that Councillor Finch moved and Councillor Deputy Mayor Grigg seconded, and Councillor Finch as the mover. Do you wish to speak to that?
I think that 9:30 would be lovely for all of us that have children, just to get here and know that our kids are on the bus safely. And I hope that that works for staff and the rest of council.
Deputy Mayor Grigg is the seconder. Do you want to speak to that?
I highly value the amount of time that we have ahead of a council meeting to be able to get in here, get things signed, and sort out any final business to ensure that we have as productive use of our meeting time as possible. I'm also mindful that we're not going too far into the day or wasting time in the morning, that when staff come in and there's a council meeting there's a lag there. But I think thinking back to how long our meetings go, we've never gone so far that we wouldn't get them done in time. So I do have the ability to get here for 9, but it absolutely makes my mornings a little bit easier and ensures that I do have as much time here in preparation as I would need. So I'm happy. I was happy to do it the other way, but I'm absolutely happy to support you in this. And I recognize that also if you're leaving your kids, and even if they're a little bit older and they're about to get on the bus and you leave just ahead of that, it's going to be in the back of your mind whether or not they got on that bus safe. So happy to support this.
Anyone else? Paul?
As the minority member that has no family responsibilities, I'm quite happy to support whatever works best for the rest of council.
Anyone else? I will just say that I think I agree with the comments that you've made, but I think to me the most important factor in this is that I would hope that anybody else in the future who is considering running for council would now not see a 9 a.m. Start time as an impediment if they are a parent of school-age children. That wouldn't be something that somebody ruled out and we never even knew that they considered running for council because they just said, I can't make 9 a.m. meetings. To me, that's the most important part of this, is that it opens it up, potentially opens it up to other people to consider it in the future, which is very important, I think. If there's nobody else, then I will read the amendment and call the question. Moved by Finch, seconded by Grigg, and that staff be directed to amend the procedural bylaw to change the meeting time start day from 9 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. for day meetings. So, voting on the amendment, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Now I will read the amended motion, and if you want, you can speak to that one before I call the question. So the amended motion now is moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that report 2022-184 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk be received and filed, and that Council deviate from the procedural bylaw section 4.1 and adopt the 2023 Council meeting schedule as amended and remove budget from the February 15th, 2023, March 1st, 2023, and March 22nd, 2023 meetings, and change the December 22nd, 2023 meeting to December 20th, 2023, and that staff be directed to amend the procedural bylaw to change the meeting time start day from 9 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. for day meetings. Does anybody wish to speak to that? All in favor? Opposed? That is carried. The right way. And 9.6D, Report 2022, excuse me, Report 2022-180 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk regarding amending Fireworks Bylaw 36-14. Alicia, is there anything you want to highlight in there for council?
Sure. So staff became aware that there are some residents in Tempsford and other parts of Zorra, I'm assuming, that celebrate Diwali. And as part of the celebrations, this often includes lighting fireworks off. So in an effort to be more inclusive, staff brought this report and recommendation forward to amend the fireworks bylaw to include Diwali in a list of appropriate celebrations for fireworks.
Questions from council on the report? Deputy Mayor Gregg.
I was just wondering if staff could maybe provide a little bit of context to the question about what's written later in the bylaw, just so that we ensure that what we're passing up here, I recognize it's separate, but the bylaw 72-22 to amend fireworks bylaw 36-14, that that bylaw only speaks to the sale of the fireworks, but in what is being proposed here to amend the fireworks bylaw, that by amending what is to be what holidays are able to be sold to, that then how does that then leverage? Where is it in bylaw that you can actually light those fireworks off on those days?
So I don't have the bylaw sections in front of me, but in the bylaw, it references this section that I have up on the screen as appropriate holidays for fireworks. So it's kind of an administrative funny way that this bylaw was written, but basically we had to amend this section so that in a later section in the bylaw, you could be allowed to light fireworks on that day.
Anyone else? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Gregg, that council enact bylaw 74-22 to amend fireworks bylaw 36-14. Anybody wish to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.6 E, Report 2022-190 from the Director of Corporate Services Clerk regarding 2022-190 municipal and school board election statistics. Karen, is there anything you want to highlight for council in that report?
No, there's not.
Questions from council on that report? Paul?
Well, as I said, last council meeting when you had a similar report, there's nothing I love more than numbers, than charts and graphs and all that kind of stuff. But the one I looked at was the breakdown by age, and that looks very startling that 18 to 39 were less than 15%. But then I looked at the voters list, and there is a lot of people on there that went to school with my kids and haven't lived in Zorra Township in 15 years. So they're still included. And then I looked, there was a lot of households where there's 5 or 6 voters listed, and I'm sure that at least 2 or 3 of those have moved away at some point. So, and that impacts that age group because those are the ones that haven't been removed when they moved away. And so we have a campaign all through the election to make sure you're on the voters list, but we don't have a campaign to make sure you're not on the voters list. So it skews those numbers, and I'm not as concerned that the younger people aren't voting as those numbers would indicate. So my question to you, Karen, is I know the next election there's going to be a new organization do the voters list, and can you fill us in, like, how can we make this somehow accurate?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So yeah, Elections Ontario is taking over the voters list, and we're positive that we're being positive that it's going to be a better situation going forward. But I do also just want to note that so the voters list that you originally would have looked at would have been prior to any what we call data cleansing that township staff would have done. So a lot of times those individuals that have moved and left and gone to school, their parents will receive that envelope and they'll write moved on it and they'll send it back to the township office and we'll remove them from the system, so they don't actually all go towards these stats. So obviously not all of them, but there is still a cleansing part that we would have done after the list that you would have saw. So just as a side note, but yeah, we are hopeful that the new list will be better than previous years, and we still intend to, I think it was more than a year in advance, we were putting out publications every way we could, telling people to let us know either to remove them or to add them. So aside from doing that, yeah.
Follow up to Paul's there, if I could, and I guess I can. I don't know why I said that. So will when Elections Ontario takes that over, the voters list over for the next election, will they benefit from that data cleansing that happened?
Yes, they will.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to thank the corporate service staff for having the foresight to move ahead with internet voting. I think it was a real success. Just the availability that people could have voted from their phones, they could have voted from their house phone, they could have voted from an iPad, sitting out in the parking lot. The ease of voting, I think, when we do have more races, will be reflected in the voter turnout. I just think it was fantastic. I live in London, and we are still paper ballots. I went to my voting station at 10 o'clock so I could get in here, and it didn't open until about 10:30 because the paper lists weren't delivered. So they had turned away probably 20 voters who lost the right to vote because they couldn't vote. So I think the ease that this offers was fabulous for our ratepayers.
Anyone else? I will read the motion. Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that report 2022-190 from the Director of Corporate Services be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody wish to speak to that? I would just add that I think, first of all, I mean, yeah, I'm arguably the only person who loves data more than Paul here. And I love this, but I was also a little bit cautious about how much to read into it in that it is a subsection of the population of the township, a relatively small subsection, and also, depending on how you want to characterize it, these are people who do something that the majority of the population of the township doesn't do. So statistically, how relevant are they? How much can you actually extrapolate this to the rest of the population is somewhat challenging, right? Because by definition, they're not the average voter, because the average voter didn't vote, right? So there's a caution there, I guess. But overall, I think the internet voting, if anything, is going to appeal more, I think, to a younger resident, which is a chunk of the population that votes less than usual. It's absolutely the trend in the future. And I think for geographically large and rural municipalities, to not require someone to come, in October, where usually the weather is fine, but it isn't always, to enable them to go and do it in 1 minute and 5 seconds on average, I think, from home, as opposed to driving to a voting place. I think whenever you make it, add any kind of challenge or impediment to anything, you're going to reduce turnout. So I think it's all good, and hopefully a lot of the times with these things, the first time you do it, there's a little bit of a change curve for people. I fully expect that the next time, especially if there's more than 2 ward races, that the turnout will be even higher. And certainly in this case, the turnout was higher than in some municipalities, larger municipalities that had more elections, that our turnout was higher anyway, even with only 2 ward races. So I still say, same thing I said after the last report on the election, any way you slice this, while the numbers are nothing to be proud of, that's more a reflection of society than our actual voting method here, which I think is better than probably it was when it was by phone and by turning up to vote in person. So, anybody else before I call the question? Katie.
It was really interesting. I like me some charts too. But it was really great to see the average amount of time spent, because I think we've all had those phone calls. I don't know how much they do them anymore, but it's like, oh, do you have, just a few minutes to answer a few quick questions about what radio stations you listen to or whatever it is. And it's never what it says it is. And I think part of when we said this is what we're doing, part of the selling feature was it's efficient and it doesn't take much time. And I think it's helpful to me to see, like, it hard and fast, it truly 1 minute and 5 seconds is what it took to use the internet to vote. And so as we proceed forward and we share this message the next time we have an election, assuming this is the way that we're going, that is not that false advertising that we often hear for how long it takes for you to wait for your appointment or in your booking or whatever it is. Everything is always longer, and this was actually shorter than what we were promised. So that was a great thing to take away.
Anyone else? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that report 2022-190 from the Director of Corporate Services be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.6F, report 2022-189 from the Chief Administrative Officer regarding 2023 pay administration policy salary grid adjustment. And Dawn, is there anything you want to highlight in there for council?
This was an extremely difficult report to write. given, where we are with interest rates, where we are with the CPI increasing, the release today showed the Ontario rate was down to 6.5. For the year, the Ontario average for the first 10 months is 6.9. So it's not pleasant for anybody, for the purchase of goods and services that we have, for all the people sitting around the table now that have to go out and buy groceries, have to buy cars. They're feeling those impacts too. We also have to look at our ratepayers to see that we're not doing something that's going to impact the budget negatively, and there is no way around that when it comes to this. When I look at the past 10 years of increases, by and large, before the pay administration policy came into place, CPI was followed almost religiously. From 2013 to 2018, the largest increase that staff received was 1.5%. So, that was a 6-year period where the CPI was low, our staff raises were low. And a one-time bump like this, hopefully only a 1-year bump like this, is something that, we've put forward for council to consider. I did consider recommending something less and going away from the policy, but in the end, I felt that it would be only fair for council to have the discussion and, take myself out of that decision-making on behalf of council, considering the policy is in place. So that's why this is before council today.
Questions for Don on the report? I have one. Have any other area councils that we know of, have they either had a report from staff on this, or have any others made a decision that we know of yet?
I have been in contact with various treasurers in the area, and there has been one for sure that's gone before their council already with no comments. And then I have others that are going forward with a report based on their policy and stating at COLA at their time within their policy.
Thank you. Any other questions? I do have a motion. I'm going to read it and put it on the floor. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Grigg, that council support following the pay administration policy with all pay bands seeing an increase of 6.7% effective January 1st, 2023, as per the Ontario September CPI. Councillor Mitchell, as the mover, do you want to speak to that?
I think we all saw this coming. The CPI has been higher for the last better part of a year than it's been since the 80s. 286,000 is a big impact on the budget. To get some context of what a 6.7% increase was, I did a little research, and according to Stats Can, the average annual wage increase for private sector contracts of 500 plus employees contracts was 2.6% in the first 7 months of this year. That was only based on 40,000 employees, because Stats Can doesn't keep for less than 500. According to Canadian Press Story on September 27th, there was a survey by Eckler Limited of all industries, private and public, so far this year was a 4.2%, and a website called Canadian HR Reporter said the Ontario increase has been 3.4%. So 6.7 is higher than all of those. And there are, generally speaking, some advantages of working for a public sector employee. You get job security. Township's not going broke. We're not closing up and moving to Tennessee like the factory in Tilsonburg announced today. You have a good OMERS pension. You get a few more stat holidays than the private sector, and a few other things too. And if you work for the right township, you have the opportunity for a 4-day work week. But using the CPI increase is a fair policy. If we don't keep our pay level at the increase, we're actually asking our staff to work for less money than they were making last year relative to what it costs to live. And everybody chooses what their career path is, what level of education they want, what type of work interests them, what level of responsibility, and what working conditions they want to work under. And so I think for most people, working for the township is a pretty good job, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's how you attract and keep the best and the brightest. And we've attracted them, we want to keep them, and we want to keep them happy. So we do have a policy to follow the CPI increase. It just happens that this year it's 6.7%. I think we should follow that policy. We could make a political statement and say we're going to increase it less, but that's only a short-term thing, because part of the policy is that every 3 years we go out to the market and see what other municipalities are paying, and if we are trailing, part of our policy is to catch up, because if we don't, we won't attract the best and the brightest. So much as it hurts to the budget, I support, and you may think I'm the last guy to do this, but I support going at 6.7% because I think it's a fair policy and we should follow it.
Deputy Mayor Grigg is the seconder. Do you want to speak to it?
So we should switch seats tonight. So when I first read this report, I thought there's no way, that almost $300,000 impact is just stifling. I think Paul's been warning us, and it's easy to just sort of go agenda to agenda and try to push this off, but here it is, and I mean timely, heavily aware that our residents who are going to be receiving these property tax bills in the mail, that a lot of them are in jobs where they committed to their education and had expectations of what their living conditions were going to be in their workplace, hazards and whatnot, and a lot of them are being brutalized in what is happening with their wage freezes. So especially in healthcare, especially in education. And so I looked at this and thought, how can we be fair for everyone? And the reality is we can't be fair for everyone. We can be fair within what we can control, and this is what we can control. And one of the things that I reached out to Paul because I thought, okay, if anyone's going to have some good perspective for me to chew over here, I'm looking for some equity out of this. I'm looking for some fairness. But I want to know what my fiscally conservative friend is thinking of this. And he raised a really good point, and he touched on it at the end of his spiel there, about that we did, and we just recently did within the last calendar year, we did that assessment of all of the roles in the municipality and those pay grades and those pay bands, and took a serious look at what those job descriptions were. Like, our employees went through exactly what they do and how they do it, and council endorsed that compensation schedule was appropriate and it was competitive, and we made some adjustments in areas that we were falling behind. So while I would love to see something a little bit smaller because it just feels a little bit more digestible heading into the budget, the reality is it's a full sense of affordability, because if we are going to proceed as a municipality in ensuring that we are paying fairly and competitively, it's going to be something that we'll turn around, have that assessment done, and we're going to have to make up that gap again if that's who we're going to choose to be here in Zorra. So while it's incredibly difficult, and my thoughts are definitely with the people who are in other sectors who are not having an opportunity to have reasonable people like us around this table having these discussions, I am in full support of Paul's motion.
Anybody else want to speak to this? Kevin. Sorry.
Yeah, a lot of my points were covered, but I just wanted to add one thing or build upon what Paul was saying. And I think that to keep and attract the talented staff that we have, that's going to pay in savings down the road in a lot of ways. And we've heard a bunch of examples tonight of creative ways that we've come up with saving money. And I think that's the important piece, is that it looks like it's a spend. In reality, it is an upfront spend, but it's an investment as well.
Anyone else? So I usually don't do this because you've all said the things that I was going to say, but I want to clarify it a little bit more. 6.7 is a lot of money. When I worked in engineering, everywhere that I worked, every department that I worked in, there was always an expectation that the engineers had to earn in cost savings or innovation, increased profits, what your salary was. That was the rule of thumb. And sometimes you did great at it, sometimes you didn't, but that was kind of the expectation, that whatever you paid, whatever you were paid, you had to earn that. I've always sort of thought of that as I mean, it's what I was used to, so it's just the way I kind of thought the world functioned, but I've always thought of it as a kind of a good rule of thumb, and I think a lot of time people forget that the only value you are to your employer is the revenue that you generate for your employer. Otherwise, they're better off to not have you as an employee, right? And circling back to the presentation that you got from Nancy Orr tonight, so that that's the third or fourth time I've heard her do it. Twice I presented it with her, and once I presented on my own to another group on the Maple Leaf project that we did. That Maple Leaf project generated, I can't remember exactly how much revenue for us as a township. When by the time it's all shaken out, it's going to be approximately how much? A little over $1 million. What I really learned from the not so much from the presentations that I gave, but from the questions that I got from the groups that I presented to, was that I was focusing on the decisions that we made as a council that allowed us to go from the point of where we first heard the idea of maybe we buy it and redevelop it to the time where we actually finalized the deal and it was done and it was sold and it was out of our hands. Which there were some brilliant decisions made, obviously, but the reality was, what I realized as I heard questions from other councils was, I don't think, because of the council staff relations that, depending on how you want to look at it, that they had or didn't have, they would not have even been had the opportunity to have those decisions put in front of them to consider. And the only way you get that is if, as Paul said, and as Kevin said, you attract and retain those high quality people. So, to Kevin's point, 6.7% is going to be $286,343. Well, we earned more than that on the Maple Leaf deal alone. So this is absolutely an investment from my point of view. I don't know what the next thing's going to be after Maple Leaf. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be something else. Something's going to happen. And when we do that next, we're going to sell this land and we're going to do that development and try and pull off a childcare and 100% renewable energy building that's going to save us money in the long run. I didn't even touch on ZMF and what we put staff through on that, how many times we endlessly asked for reports, and yet somehow ended up on a building that's going to meet our environmental goals and save us money over the lifetime of the building. This is absolutely an investment on behalf of residents, to say to them, we're going to spend an extra $286,343 next year, and don't worry, just like the past few years, we're going to earn it back for you. So to me, I honestly think, I'm very happy that council, it sounds like, is looking at going in this direction, because I would hate to jeopardize the ability of this council to do those kinds of innovative things that pay off for residents in the form of better services, better assets, and lower costs in the long run. So I'm hopeful that that's the direction that council is going to go. Anybody else? I'll read it again and call the question. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Gregg, that council support following the pay administration policy with all pay bands seeing an increase of 6.7% effective January 1st, 2023, as per the Ontario September CPI. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 10, so I have 10. I don't have one for 10A. I do have one for 10B. So 10A, 2023 Rural Ontario Municipal Association Delegation Form. Are there any, excuse me, any questions from council before somebody hands me a motion? Deputy Mayor Gregg.
So I have a blank motion in front of me that I'm happy to fill out. I believe in previous years we had a bit of roundtable discussion. I think it's going to be a little bit different because we're right at it's our first working meeting of this term of council. So typically we remake delegations if there's an issue that's been of concern to Zorra. we continue those conversations every opportunity we have. So just because if you're aware of a delegation that's been made, that doesn't mean that we stop making it if that change hasn't happened. And it's also an opportunity for new concerns or opportunities for conversations with those ministries. So I can sort of fill it out if that's okay with you, if we can sort of just have a bit of discussion about some of those topics, and then I can draft it, and then we can get it
Have
over
you
for
got
vote.
any, yeah, no, that's a good plan. Have you got any suggestions to start the discussion on?
So we typically do education. Usually we have a bit of a discussion about whether Community Schools Alliance is spearheading that, or if we are. I guess we could always put in, I think we typically put in to request for it, and then
Yep.
they do as well, and then depending on who gets it, then we can sort of formulate who's going to go.
So Community Schools Alliance generally doesn't, because they don't have standing to request the delegation, so they usually request it through a member municipality, and for whatever, as long as I can remember, it's been Zorra, so so that would be us to submit it. So I think we should, I would agree that we would submit one to Ministry of Education on behalf of Community Schools Alliance, and then it'll be up to us how much of it we want to use for what. But I think if everybody's good with that. Anybody else have any other suggestions from ministries that we want to talk to? Paul?
Well, we're certainly concerned about the new legislation with the Strong Mayors Act and all the impacts on development charges and all that. So I guess that would be Steve Clark that we want to talk to with that.
We should probably forward that letter to the rest of council. I didn't think of that at the time. But per direction of council at the last meeting, I did write that letter with Lisa's help and sent it to the minister. So I'll get Lisa to forward that to all of you so you can read that letter that was sent. And so I think a delegation agreed in follow-up to that letter would be appropriate. Anybody else? Dawn, do you think it would be worthwhile to talk to Ministry of Finance about OMPF? You're on that. Well, are you on that? I don't know if it actually exists or functions anymore, does it? Yeah. Okay.
They have kept that our rates exactly as it was last year. Actually, our allocation went up to $2,000. Something like that. So it's about $80,000 on OMPF went up. So the funding and will stay exactly the same, just the distribution on how it was dispersed across the province changed a little bit. Sorry, it might be a good idea to reinforce to the ministry how important it is as a funding mechanism for small rural Ontario municipalities that they maintain that funding envelope.
Yeah, and also 80-something thousand is not enough. It's not right. So yeah, I think Ministry of Finance as well to talk about OMPF. And I should have said OMPF is the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund. It's a grant that the province instituted years ago, and the intention of it originally was to make up for the 75% property tax reduction of agricultural land. So it used to be that farm properties would pay the full tax at the residential rate, and then each farm business would apply and get a 75% rebate from the province directly for that, and that thereby the municipality would get the full property tax that it was owed. They changed the system, I don't know when, 90s? Early 90s, something like that. Yeah, they changed feels like 20 years ago. Anyway, they changed the system to make it more administratively efficient so that farms would only pay the 25% directly to the municipalities, and the province would then pay to the municipalities the 75%. But over time, the 75% became 70%, became 65%, became 60%. So this is not a grant, this is not a handout from the province. This is literally supposed to be the 75% of property tax paid by agricultural land that we don't get. And I think we should get it. So, I mean, especially as our farms get bigger and equipment gets bigger and they have more and more machinery and equipment and certainly aggregate equipment, we should have this money. So I think that's absolutely one we should be making. Anybody else have any thoughts on other ministries? Paul?
Minister of Natural Resources, and there's a couple of angles there. One was the one we've been beating for years, was aggregate income. And the other is they're now responsible again for conservation authorities and voice our concerns about some of the legislation impacting that, and especially that they won't be permitted to, I know it kind of crosses into the earlier one, but the legislation that they won't be allowed to work for municipalities in helping with our planning.
Can I suggest that we don't talk to natural resources about aggregate, because TAPMO, which is the top aggregate producing municipalities in Ontario, of which Zorra is a member, they will be, I don't know it for a fact, but I know it for a fact that they will be requesting a delegation with the minister to talk about that one. So I'm going to suggest that we leave that one for them to do, which I may or may not be a part of at the conference. But I think to talk to the Ministry of Natural Resources about conservation authority changes and the more houses faster and how they impact municipalities, I think would be good. However, I will look to you as a member of the Board of Upper Thames to maybe get us some input from Upper Thames on that, and then we'll probably be looking to staff for some input on the effects of the more homes faster, on more houses faster, on risk with not having them available to us as a commenting agency. So we'll pull together some kind of. So if, Paul, if you could talk to staff at Upper Thames, find out who might be able to contribute something to that, and maybe we'll try and pull together one delegation that speaks to those changes. If we can. If we can't, if it doesn't work, we'll make that call. But anything else? Any other ministries? Keep in mind that we might not get them all. I shut my mouth off a little bit on Twitter today, so maybe might not. Maybe Mr. Clark won't. Yeah, good point. Okay. Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that staff complete the Roma delegation request form requesting a meeting with the Ministry of Education on behalf of the Community Schools Alliance, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing regarding strong mayors, the Ministry of Finance regarding OMPF, the Ministry of Natural Resources regarding changes to Conservation Authority changes, and more homes faster impacts. Anybody want to speak to that? I'll just say on the strong mayors one, we would allow some latitude there to talk about the one that they announced today. So the Strong Mayors is part of the More Houses Faster Act, and the one they announced today is the Better Municipal Governance Act. You guys are okay with that? Okay. Excuse me, anybody else want to speak to it? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And 10B. Any questions on 10B before I read it? Moved by Finch, seconded by Grigg, that Zorra Township support the resolution from the municipality of East Ferris regarding childcare workforce shortage, and that this resolution be forwarded to the Oxford County area municipalities to request their support and advocacy, and that this resolution be forwarded to the Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce, Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, and Oxford County MPP Ernie Hardeman. Councillor Finch is the mover. Do you wish to speak to that?
Sure. I think East Ferris isn't anywhere near us, but I think it's important for us to support other municipalities that are showing leadership to try to bring this to further governments. And I really like that they put in here that they want to increase the wage as well as give a better education opportunity. It speaks to our children, it speaks to our elderly with PSWs, and I think all of that, the PSWs, I firsthand know that the program didn't roll out quite like they had hoped, I think, and I like to see that they're trying to do better.
Councillor Grigg is or Deputy Mayor Grigg is the seconder. Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to second and support this. I think in Zorra we've identified the critical need for service of childcare for a variety of reasons, and I think sometimes some programs, as well intentioned as they are, if they don't have all the functioning moving pieces, it's a missed opportunity and money wasted as opposed to sort of an investment. So I think there's some key pieces identified here, and I think, you know, the squeaky wheel mentality of, you know, there's some legit concerns here that would have impact on us in Zorra Township, and if we can be a part of making this a little bit louder for the province, then maybe there could be some changes considered.
Anyone else? Paul?
I would like to support this motion, but I'm not going to. And the reasons I would like to support it is because I agree with the intent of the motion, and I certainly understand that there is a need for child care. That's why I supported our investment in the ZMCC. How many C's are attached to it? And I also understand that there's a severe shortage of early childhood educators, as there is with PSWs, nurses, tradespeople, truck drivers, and just about every factory that you drive by. But I'm not going to support it for three reasons. First of all, I don't think the government should mandate what private sector industry has to pay its employees. I think it should be by supply and demand, and this is applying to not government ECEs. As I read it, it's for private sector child care, and if those operators need to pay $18 or $20 or $25 or $30 an hour, they should incorporate that in their business plan and pay those employees to attract them. Second reason is the resolution doesn't define what an equitable level of wage and benefits is. It could be 25, could be 30, who knows? And I need to know that. And the third reason is I don't know enough about the PSW training program to know if that's something that should be emulated. So much as I agree with the intent, I can't support it for those reasons.
Anyone else? I share Paul's concerns on this, but I am going to vote in favor of it because I think, I mean, in general, when the market works and it's providing the services, I'm happy to let the market provide the services. When it doesn't work, and in the case of these, it is not working, and the service is not being provided, and the shortage of long-term care beds, shortage of early childhood educators. I mean, we're seeing literally like schools have closed because they don't have early childhood educators in them. Kids are not in school because they don't have this. So when the service is not being delivered, then I think we have, that's literally what we have government for, is to step in and say when services aren't being delivered by the natural market forces, then government will make an attempt to step in some form or fashion and do that. I'm fine with it not saying specifically what it is at this point. I think it's just saying it needs to be addressed. You know, how it'll be addressed, you never get what you ask for anyway, but I think if we don't ask for it, it's not going to be addressed. And I think, to me, these are services that our residents need, and they are also, there's a component of economic development in here too, in that if we don't have the required ECEs and kids in school, then there's a chunk of labor force that's not available to us to do the jobs that need to be done. And for as long as I can remember, in Oxford County, in Zorra Township, the number one constraint on economic development has been labor force shortage, as long as I can remember. So I will be voting in favor of it. Anybody else before I read it and call the question? Moved by Finch, seconded by Gregg, that Zorra Township support the resolution from the municipality of East Ferris regarding childcare workforce shortage, and that this resolution be forwarded to the Oxford County area municipalities to request their support and advocacy, and that this resolution be forwarded to the Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce, Minister of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade, and Oxford County MPP Ernie Hardeman. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 11, boards and committees. So before I read it, I have one motion here to receive and file 11A through C. Does anybody want to pull any of those out of here separately? Paul?
Just a comment, not pull
Yep.
it out.
Okay.
On C, on a little bit of explanation on C.
On C? Okay.
Yeah.
Anybody else on either A or B or C? No? Paul, on C.
Yeah, and C is about appointing under the new rules, and I gave the council previously the wrong information because I misunderstood. I thought the entire composition of the Upper Thames Board was supposed to be 70% elected officials, which made more sense to me. But it has to be 70% of each municipality, which on the Upper Thames Board only applies to London because they're the only ones that have more than one representative. They have 4 of which this last term, 3 were citizen appointees. So unless they ask for a variance, then they will have to have at least 3 of their councils on the next board, councilors on the next board. For the rest of us, you either are elected or you're not elected. You're not 70%. So I just wanted to confirm that and apologize for the incorrect information that I'd given previously.
Anybody else? Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that items 11A through C be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 12, information items. So I have, before I read it, a motion here to receive and file 12A through H. Are there any in there? First of all, is there any in there that anybody wants to pull out of A through H to receive and file? Do anything separate or different with? Okay. Is there any in there that anybody wants to speak to before I call the question? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that items 12A through H be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Unfinished business, none. Notices of motion, none. Bylaws. Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that bylaws 72-22, 73-22, 74-22, and 75-22 be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed. And further, that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. Anybody want to speak to that? I would just say, just by way of explanation, maybe a little bit of orientation part here. This is like 99.999% of the time, this just happens and everybody votes. But a lot of the things we did today, like, so for instance, when we elected a deputy mayor, staff are going to return with a bylaw to the next meeting. So we chose to have a deputy mayor, but it's not actually bylaw, it's not actually law until that bylaw comes back. So at the next meeting, there'll be a bylaw that'll say, I don't know what it'll be, 76-22 or something like that. So, you know, to some extent, this is a formality. Council's already made the decisions, but this is the part where you're actually making the decision that you made at a previous meeting into an actual bylaw that now is the way that it is in that rectangle over there anyway. I don't actually want to encourage this, but technically you could speak to and try and kill one of these bylaws at this point. It is technically another procedurally okay way to try and kill a thing that you didn't like the first time it came around, is to say, I argued against it before and it's technically procedurally okay. It's generally considered sort of, I don't know, I hesitate to characterize it, but it's kind of considered like sour grapes, right? Like, you had your crack, you debated it, you lost, now we're going through the formal part. But just so you guys understand what's going on here, it isn't just a formality, it's where it actually, you formalize your decisions of council that you've made before. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And items of community interest in the calendar. So, today is the 16th. Western MPA conference on Friday. I started to get a little bit nervous about that today, actually, when I started looking at the program. There's like some impressive people on there. Oxford 4-H Awards on Friday night in Embro. It's doing it again. It gets tired, yeah. It gets tired. You and I are going to Thames Public School on Monday afternoon? Yeah? Oh, okay. Well, we'll see. We're planned to anyway. Wednesday, the 23rd at 2 p.m. is the inaugural meeting of Oxford County Council. At the inaugural at 2 o'clock will be election of the warden, decision on the term of the deputy warden, and election of the deputy warden. And then the first regular working meeting of county council will be that night at 7 o'clock. St. Andrew's banquet on Friday the 25th in Embro, if it goes ahead, I guess.
Oh, I think it's gonna go ahead. I
Yeah?
think their,
Okay.
I think their numbers are just disappointing, so anybody out there that wants to buy a ticket,
And,
it'll be a good meal. And the haggis will be delicious.
yeah. And then, where am I here? ZMCC is having a Christmas market on the 26th, Saturday the 26th.
Correct. It's in the large hall at the Thamesford District Recreation Center.
Mm-hmm. And then,
On the same day, can I interrupt?
yeah, absolutely.
On the same day, the Thamesford Lions Club is hosting a event in the Beatty Room. Santa is coming to town. Cost is $250 a person. It runs from 11 a.m. till 3:30. It includes some hot dog and some snacks and a photo opportunity with Santa. There's raffle tickets for door prizes and some silent auction items. And then there's a variety of charities that this event will be benefiting.
That is also concurrent with the 20th anniversary of the Thamesford branch, that building of the Thamesford branch of the Oxford County Library.
There is, I believe, a private event being held in the library at the same time. In the library?
Public,
Okay.
pretty sure. Is there a private one too? I know there's a public one.
I just know that Santa's in the lobby and there's concerns about there being planned events and shared spaces that may be conflicting. But
Okay.
I may have my information slightly skewed.
Okay.
And then there's also the Hockey Association is doing some bake sale items at the arena as well. So there's a lot going on in the village. I think there'll be lots of opportunities to get out and do things.
And then the night of the 26th in Embro.
We have our Embro Christmas lighting of the tree downtown, and then we have a parade afterwards going out to the arena with a meet and greet with Santa and some kids' activities.
And the lighting of the lights is at 6?
Yep.
Parade starts at 6:30?
Yep.
Okay. And then I think we are back here. Well, I still have in here a meeting on the 30th, but we don't have that. So we're back here on the 7th for a regular day meeting at 9:30. Right? No, 9. No, we changed
Technically,
next year, so
We
this one
changed
is
next
still
year,
at 9.
so this one is still 9 o'clock.
Right.
To be technical.
Doesn't, we did, which is that one. Okay. And I also missed the Lions having their Christmas dinner on December 5th, Monday, December 5th at 6 o'clock in the TDRC.
There's also on Saturday, December 3rd, the Lions are doing their Christmas caroling showcase. It's happening at both the South Lions Park and the Thamesford Arena.
Oh, yeah.
And it starts at 6 p.m. The Lions have started doing some lights in the park since putting in the pavilion. It's awesome to see how these projects are now changing the way that the community's gathering and celebrating. So it starts at 6 p.m. in the park, and then performances start at the Thamesford Arena at 6:30. And the Christmas kettle will be on site collecting donations.
And for the day that's in it, December the 3rd is also Isabel Martin's birthday. I only know it's in my calendar. I wouldn't, well, it's, yeah, just about. Anything else for items of community interest or the calendar, Paul?
I got 3 things. Next Tuesday is Upper Thames Board meeting, and we'll be going deep into the budget. And Saturday, December 3rd, Steel City Rovers concert at Harrington Hall. It's the first post-COVID concert. Tickets available for a mini Haka member. And Wednesday evening, December the 7th, the community group at the Brown School Presentation will be on the Raw Carrot Soup Enterprise, which is about employment for people on social assistance. So,
Anyone else? Items of community interest for the calendar? Okay. Moved by Stuart, seconded by Greg, that council move into closed meeting session at 8:30 p.m. pursuant to section 239.2C, a proposed or pending acquisition or disposition of land by the municipality or board regarding 46 Commissioner Street, Embro, and 21st Line unopened road allowance. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And Maggie, will you let us know when we're off audio and video? So then I have, coming out of closed, moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that council accept the offer submitted by A-Rock Aggregate and Tim and Kim Wallace to purchase the 21st line unopened road allowance, and that the mayor and clerk are hereby directed to sign the necessary agreements to complete the purchase. Anybody want to speak to that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And I think we have confirmatory and adjournment. You're good? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Stewart, that bylaw 76-22, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held November 16th, 2022, be read a first, second, and third time this November 16th, 2022, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that this session of council be now adjourned and herewith closed at 9:15 p.m. And the next meeting of council be called for December 7th, 2022 at 9 a.m. in the council chambers at the Township Municipal Office. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried.